The Duke of Calverton walked into my counting house at 9 o'clock the morning after he told a ballroom I had nothing worth saying. And the first thing he did was reach for the chair at the head of the table. I let him touch it. I let his hands settle on the carved back of it, the way a man settles a hand on a thing he assumes is his. And then I said, without rising, "That seat is taken, Your Grace." He turned. The light from the tall window behind me fell across his face, and I watched the precise moment he placed me. It moved through him like cold water. The woman in grey at Lady Sefton's ball, the one he had glanced at once and dismissed in a voice pitched to carry, was sitting at the head of his most important meeting, with her father's ledgers open in front of her, and her father's pen lying uncapped on the green baize. He did not say my name. He did not yet know it. He had not troubled to learn it the night before. "Forgive me," he said, and the apology came out of him like a reflex, the way breeding teaches a man to apologize for a thing before he understands what the thing is. "I was told I would be meeting the principal of Holt's." "You are," I said. "Sit down, Your Grace. You have rather less time than you think." There were 4 men in that room, and every one of them was watching to see what I would do. My chief clerk, Mr. Pelham, stood at my right hand with his spectacles pushed up into his grey hair and an expression of great and careful blankness. The Duke's man of business stood near the door, and the Duke himself stood in the middle of my counting room, in a coat that cost more than Pelham earned in a year, looking at the pen on the baize as though it had spoken to him. I knew why he had come. I had known for a fortnight, which was longer than he had known he would need to come at all. His name was Nathaniel Croft, and the Dukedom of Calverton drew £18,000 a year from land in 3 counties. And none of that land could save him now, because the thing that was drowning him was not land. It was £60,000 his late brother had sunk into a trading venture 3 years before, a fleet of merchantmen and a half-built dock on the river, and the whole of it would come good in 11 days, when those ships made the Pool of London with £80,000 of cargo in their holds, provided the cargo was insured, and provided it had a wharf to land at. Holt's held the insurance. Holt's held the lease on the wharf. And Holt's, since my father died in the spring, was me. "Mr. Pelham," I said, "the Calverton policies." Pelham laid them in front of me, 3 sheets of close underwriting in my father's hand, and I turned them so the Duke could see them across the length of the table without being able to read a word. "Your brother insured the Hesperus venture with my father in the spring of 1813, I said. "My father carried the risk for 3 years at a premium that was, frankly, a kindness, because he liked your brother, and your brother was honest about what he did not know. The policies lapse at Michaelmas. That is in 9 days. Your ships are due in 11. You require me to renew the underwriting on £80,000 of risk, and you require the wharf, and you have come to ask me for both on the morning after you informed Lady Sefton's ballroom that I was the dullest woman in London." The room went very quiet. I had not meant to say the last part. I am a careful woman. I had built a careful life out of being careful, out of being the still grey figure at the edge of rooms that men's eyes slid past. But I had buried my father in April, and I had spent the summer learning exactly how it feels to have grown men decline to take your hand, because the hand is a woman's. And the night before, a duke had looked through me as though I were a window, and some small, ungoverned thing in me had been waiting since to be heard. The Duke did not flinch. I will give him that. He looked at me as though seeing me properly for the first time, and his eyes, dark, near to black in the low light, nothing like the cool, pale stare I had built him into in my head, moved over my face with an attention that was almost an apology in itself. "I said a great many foolish things last night," he said quietly. I had drunk to forget that I would be standing in this room this morning with my hat in my hand. That is not an excuse. It is only the reason. It was a better answer than I had braced for. I did not let it move me. "Your Grace, you may keep your apology," I said. "I did not come down to this room for it. Tell me instead what you are prepared to offer." That was the moment, I think, that the meeting truly began. I want to be honest about the ball, because it matters to what came after, and because I have learned that the parts of a story we are most tempted to skip are the parts that carry the weight. I had not gone to Lady Sefton's for pleasure. I do not go anywhere for pleasure. I had gone because I had heard the Duke of Calverton would be there, and I wished to see, before I held his fortune in my 2 hands, what kind of man he was when he did not know he was being measured. So I wore grey and stood near the card-room door and made myself easy to overlook, which has never required much effort, and I watched him. He was courteous to the dowagers and patient with the debutantes, and he danced once, correctly, with a hostess's daughter, and he never once smiled in a way that reached the rest of his face. And then a friend of his, a florid man with a wet laugh, had nodded toward me and asked who the grey woman was, and the Duke had glanced at me over the rim of his glass and said, in the carrying voice men use when they are certain a person is too small to hear, "No one. A merchant's daughter. Nothing there worth the trouble of an introduction." Nothing there worth the trouble. I had gone home and I had sat at my father's desk with his pen in my hand, and I had thought, very well, I will let him keep that opinion until precisely the moment it costs him most. And I had decided that night that I would not refuse him outright the next morning, because refusal would only send him to other underwriters and a slower ruin he could blame on the market. No, I would let him learn, in full daylight, with witnesses, exactly how much the trouble of an introduction had been worth. I am not proud of how much I wanted it, but I will not pretend I did not want it. "I am prepared to offer the standard premium," the Duke was saying, "and a fair rent on the wharf, and my personal note for any shortfall. I am told my note is still considered good." "Your note is excellent," I agreed. "It is your judgment I am weighing, not your solvency. Sit down, Your Grace. Mr. Pelham, the gentleman may go. The Duke and I will discuss terms." His man of business made a small sound of protest, and the Duke silenced him with a look, and the room emptied until it was the Duke and Pelham and me, and the pen lying between us on the green cloth. What I learned in the next hour is that a man cornered tells you the truth he would never tell you free. He did not insure the Hesperus venture for profit. He insured it because his brother Henry had died for it. The fleet's first ship had burned at her moorings in 1813, and Henry had gone into the hold after the manifests, because the manifests named the men who had sailed, and Henry could not bear that their families should go uncompensated for want of a paper. And the deck had come down on him. Calverton, Nathaniel, had pulled his brother out of the water with his own hands, and the back of his right hand still carried the burn. A long, pale scene he kept turned toward his body, which I had taken at the ball for mere aristocratic stillness, and now understood was a man hiding a wound. He had spent 3 years and most of the dukedom's free capital finishing what had killed his brother. Not for the money, for the men in the manifest. If the fleet came home insured, every family was paid. If it sank uninsured, he was ruined, and they were ruined with him, and Henry would have died for a ledger that balanced to nothing. He told me this plainly, without performance, his scarred hand flat on the table. and I felt the careful thing I had built around myself give a single, dangerous crack. I noticed, against my own will, the way he did not look at me while he said the worst of it. The way his thumb moved once across the seam of the burn, the only sign that the words cost him anything. I noticed it, the way you notice a step missing in the dark, all at once and too late to stop. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. "I am the underwriter. You need only show me the figures." "Because you asked me what kind of man I was," he said, "last night, by standing where you stood and saying nothing. I saw you there. I did not know who you were, but I saw you watching, and I gave you the worst possible answer, and I have been ashamed of it since before I knew it would cost me anything. I am telling you the truth now, because I would rather lose the wharf to an honest refusal than win it on a lie." I had not told him I was at the ball to measure him. He had simply known. That was the first time the floor moved under me. The terms we agreed that morning were generous, and I knew they were generous, and I made them anyway. And I told myself it was because the risk was sound, and the man's note was good, and not because of his hand on the table. I would renew the underwriting at the old premium. The wharf was his for the season. He would sign at Lloyd's in 8 days, before the subscription room, where such things are properly witnessed, and the ships would come home. And that, I told myself, would be the end of the Duke of Calverton in my life. He came to the wharf himself the next afternoon, which dukes do not do, on the pretext of inspecting the berth his cargo would land at. And he found me on the quay, in a plain stuff gown, with the river wind taking my hair apart, and a tally sheet in my hand, counting in barrels what his fortune would weigh. "You are checking my arithmetic," he said. "I am checking everyone's arithmetic, Your Grace. It is the whole of my occupation. Yours is merely the most expensive at present." I had imagined the principal of Holt's would send a clerk to stand in the wind. The principal of Holt's was a clerk for 11 years, while her father was alive, and the world assumed he did the counting. I did not look up from the sheet. He did not. I did. The world was wrong about that for 11 years. It can hardly be expected to be right about it now in a single morning. He was quiet a moment, and then he said, "What else is the world wrong about, where you are concerned? I should like a list. I find I am tired of being on the wrong side of it." I looked up at that, because it was not the kind of thing his sort of man says, and the wind had put colour in his face, and his scarred hand was holding his hat against the gusts, and I was aware, in a way I did not welcome, of how the quay had emptied of everyone but the two of us and a gull. "The world believes," I said, "that a woman who can do sums cannot also feel things. It is generally easier to let it go on believing so. One is troubled a great deal less." "And is it true?" "No," I said, before I had decided to, and turned back to my barrels and heard him laugh, a real one, surprised out of him for the first time, and hated how much I wanted to hear it again. That was the courtship, such as it was. Not flowers, arithmetic in the wind. But I have learned that you may know a man better from how he stands on a cold quay while you count his fortune than from 100 drawing rooms. And what I knew of Nathaniel Croft by the end of that afternoon, I have never once had cause to unlearn. It was Viscount Lassiter who made certain it was not the end of him in my life. He came to Cornhill the following afternoon, which no peer of the realm had ever done to me before, and he was shown into the counting room as though he had bought it, and he laid his hat and his gloves and his terrible smile on my table all at once. I knew him by reputation, which was the only way anyone knew Edgar Lassiter, and the only way he wished to be known. He owned the Argus, the subscription sheet that arrived in every fashionable breakfast room twice a week, and decided, in 3 lines of print, whose daughter was ruined and whose engagement was off, and whose name might as well be struck from the book of the living. He did not write it himself. He merely owned the men who did, and the printing of it, and the long, patient ledger of everyone in London who could be made afraid. "Miss Holt," he said, "I shall be brief, because I understand you are a woman of business, and I admire it, I do. I want the Cornhill Wharf. I am building a syndicate that will want a great deal of river frontage, and yours is the best of it. And I am prepared to pay you £25,000 for the lease and the goodwill, which is a handsome figure for a parcel of mud." "It is worth 50, I said, "and it is not for sale." "Everything is for sale," said Lassiter pleasantly. "The only question is the currency. I would so much rather pay in money." I understood him perfectly. I have always understood men of his kind faster than they expect, because I have spent my life being underestimated by them. And the underestimated learn to read the room from the floor. "You are threatening to print something about me," I said. "I am observing," he said, rising and gathering his gloves, "that an unmarried woman in trade has only her reputation between herself and the gutter, and that reputations are such delicate, perishable things. I am also observing that you have been spending a great deal of private time with the Duke of Calverton. People will draw conclusions. People do so love to draw conclusions. I should hate to be the one who wrote them down." He smiled. 25,000, Miss Holt. The offer expires when my patience does." When he had gone, Pelham took off his spectacles and polished them for a long time, which is what Pelham does instead of swearing. "He cannot take the wharf, Miss Margaret," he said at last. "It is yours in law. You are of age and unmarried. You hold it free and clear. He cannot touch it." "No," I said. "He cannot take the wharf. He can only make it so that no one in the city will deal with the woman who holds it." I looked down at my father's pen, which is the same thing in 8 days, with £80,000 riding on a signature. I did not sleep that night, and somewhere in the small hours, I stopped being a careful woman and became a dangerous one, which is a different thing entirely and far more useful. The detonation, when it came in the Duke's own library 2 days later, and it was not the one I expected. I had gone to Calverton House to tell him what Lassiter wanted, because he had a right to know that the deal we had struck now had a knife held over it. He listened in silence by the cold hearth, the firelight that should have been there absent, the room all dark wood, and the particular hush of a house with too few people in it. And when I had finished, he said a thing that turned the whole story over in my hands. "Lassiter offered to buy the Hesperus debt from me 18 months ago," he said. "Henry's debt. He wanted to own the thing my brother died for. I refused him. He has not forgiven it. This is not about your wharf, Miss Holt, or it is not only about your wharf. He means to take from me through you what I would not let him take directly. He has been waiting for a lever, and you are the lever, because I was fool enough at a ball to make it look as though you were already mine. We were standing very close by then. I do not know how it happened. These things never announce themselves. The dark room had drawn us in toward the one window where a little grey daylight came, and his scarred hand was an inch from mine on the sill, and neither of us moved it, and the air went out of the room entirely. "Then we are both his target," I said, and my voice did not sound like my own. "I will not let him touch you," the Duke said, "whatever it costs. I give you my word." "Do not give me your word." I made myself say it. "Words are not signatures, Your Grace. I have spent my life learning the difference." But I did not step back, and he did not step back. And for the length of 3 heartbeats, the whole structure of rank and trade and ruin between us narrowed to the half-inch of cold air between his hand and mine. And I understood that if either of us closed it, nothing afterward would ever be the same. A footman came in with a candle. We stepped apart. The moment broke like a held breath let go. But I had felt it, and so had he. And after that there was no more pretending that this was only business. I made my choice 3 days later, and I made it in public, where it could not be unmade. The annual dinner of the marine underwriters is held at the City of London Tavern, and every man of consequence in insurance is there, and a good many men who merely wish to be thought of consequence, and that year, for the first time, 1 woman. I went because Lassiter would be there. He had taken to sitting in the gallery of Lloyd's and watching me work, letting himself be seen, letting the room understand that the Argus had its eye on the Holt woman. And 3 of my oldest counterparties had already found reasons to slow their business with me. The whisper was doing its work before a word of it was printed. So I stood up when the toasts were done in a room of 200 men, and I did the thing that could not be undone. "Gentlemen," I said, and the room quieted out of sheer astonishment that the sound had come from me. "Holt's has underwritten the risks of this city for 40 years, through my grandfather and my father, and now through me. And I have heard it suggested, of late, that the house is not what it was, because the hand that signs the policies is a woman's. I let that sit. I will answer the suggestion with a signature. Holt's will carry the full insurance on the Hesperus venture of the Duke of Calverton. £80,000 of risk at the standard premium, witnessed at Lloyd's the day after tomorrow. I tie my name and my house publicly to His Grace's cargo. If any man here thinks Holt's the worse risk for being mine, let him say so now, to my face, and not in 3 lines of someone else's print. No one said so to my face. They never do. I sat down to a silence, and then to a low, approving rumble that meant I had won the room. And across the table, the Duke of Calverton was looking at me, with something in his dark eyes that was not gratitude, and was not surprise, and was, I understood with a lurch, the same thing that had been in mine by the window in his library. I had bound my name to his before 200 witnesses, before he had said 1 word of love to me, before I had any assurance at all that when Lassiter struck, he would stand. I had done it because it was right, and because the risk was sound, and because, I will say it plainly now, because I had stopped being able to tell the difference between the soundness of the risk and the man it belonged to. And Lassiter, in the gallery, was smiling, because I had just handed him the lever he had been waiting for. The Argus came out on the Thursday. I will not repeat what it said. It is enough to say that it named me, and it named the Duke, and it printed that the unmarried Holt woman had been seen alone at Calverton House at dusk, with no chaperone, and that the marine underwriters had been treated at their own dinner to the unedifying spectacle of a tradeswoman flinging her fortune at a duke's feet in payment for what she could not get by respectable means. And beneath it, in the cold legal column where the Argus printed the documents it claimed to have come by, was a deed of sale. A deed conveying the Cornhill Wharf from Margaret Holt to Edgar, Viscount Lassiter, for £25,000. Dated a week prior, signed, the print declared, in my own hand. I had signed no such deed, but by 10 o'clock that morning, 3 of my counterparties had withdrawn from the Hesperus underwriting, because no man will share a risk with a house whose principal is a liar and a wanton, and has apparently already sold the very wharf the cargo must land at. By noon, the subscription room at Lloyd's would not meet my eye. The signing was the next day. I had publicly staked Holt's whole name on a venture that the whole city now believed I had already gutted. And the Duke of Calverton, I did not know where the Duke of Calverton was, because he had not come. And the one thing I had told him not to give me was the one thing I now, God help me, wanted, which was his word that he had not believed a line of it. I sat in the counting room with the forged deed spread on the green baize beside my father's pen, and I let myself, for 1 hour, be entirely without hope. Pelham found me there. He did not polish his spectacles. He sat down across the table, in the chair the Duke had reached for on the first morning, and he said, "Your father had a bad year in 1799, lost 3 ships in a fortnight. The whole exchange said Holt's was finished." He folded his hands. "Do you know what he did, Miss Margaret?" "He carried on," I said. My voice was not steady. "He carried on," Pelham agreed, "because the men who say a house is finished are never the men who decide it. The ledger decides it, and the ledger is yours, and it is honest, and an honest ledger has outlasted better liars than the Viscount." He stood. "You have been believed your whole life by everyone who matters, and disbelieved by everyone who does not. I should not start confusing the two now, were I you." Then he picked up my father's pen and put it in my hand, and went out and left me holding it. I had not signed that deed, and I knew because I had watched my father do it 10,000 times, and had done it 10,000 times myself, exactly how a Holt signature is made, and exactly how it cannot be forged. My father had bought the pen in Birmingham in 1786 for a guinea, a steel pen with a split nib, when the whole world still wrote with quills. And the split in the nib was sprung a hair wide, so that every downstroke a Holt ever made carried a doubled hairline. 2 fine parallel tracks where the world saw one. Every policy in that room bore it. No quill on earth could make it. And the forger who had drawn my name on Lassiter's deed had used, as forgers do, a good, ordinary quill. I sent for Pelham. I sent for the old deed box. And I sent, last, a single line to Calverton House, not asking him to come, because I had learned long ago not to ask. "Be at Lloyd's tomorrow. Witness it. That is all I require of you." The subscription room at Lloyd's was full the next day, because half of London had read the Argus, and the other half had been told what it said. And they had all come to watch the Holt woman either sign or hang. I came in plainly dressed, with Pelham behind me carrying the deed box, and I went not to my own desk, but to the centre of the floor, beneath the great bell they ring when a ship is lost. And I asked the room, in a voice my father would have known, for its attention. Lassiter was in the gallery, in his fine coat, and the Duke of Calverton was by the door, having come because I had told him to. And I felt his eyes on me, and I did not look at him, because this was mine to do. "Viscount Lassiter has published a deed," I said, and I held it up, bearing my signature, conveying my wharf to him. "I have come to tell you that it is a forgery, and to prove it here, where you can all see, so that no man among you need take my word, which I understand has lately been thought to be worth less than a peer's print." I laid the forged deed on the table. Beside it I laid 4 genuine Holt policies, drawn from the box, going back 40 years. And I gave the room my father's pen. "Every signature my house has ever made," I said, "was made with this pen. And this pen leaves a doubled line, 2 tracks, not 1, because the nib is sprung. Look at the genuine policies. Look at every Holt name there. 2 lines. I let them crowd in and look, and I heard the room change its breathing. Now look at the name on the Viscount's deed. I did not have to tell them what they would find. One line. A quill. Whoever wrote it had everything but the pen, and the pen has not left my person since my father died. It is a quiet sort of devastation, the unmasking of a forgery in a room of men who underwrite truth for their living. There was no shouting. There was only a slow, cold turning of 200 faces toward the gallery. And Edgar Lasseter standing up too fast, and the particular silence of a man who has spent his life making others afraid, discovering, all at once, that the fear has changed direction. The deed is a forgery, I said, to the room, not to him. The story printed beneath it is another. And the Argus, which has decided so many reputations in this city, has just printed a falsehood that any clerk can disprove with a magnifying glass. I leave it to you, gentlemen, to decide what a sheet's word is worth after this. I turned the pen so it caught the light. Holtz will sign the Calverton underwriting now, in front of you all, with the pen that cannot lie. Who will share the risk? 3 hands went up, then a dozen, then the room. I signed. 2 lines where the world saw one. It was only when it was done, when the bell was silent and Lasseter was gone from the gallery, and the underwriters were pressing forward to put their names beneath mine, that I let myself look at the door. The Duke of Calverton had not moved. He had stood through the whole of it with his scarred hand at his side, witnessing, as I had asked, and not once stepping forward to save me, because he had understood, better than any man I had ever met, that I did not need to be saved. I needed to be seen doing it. He crossed the floor to me then, through the crowd, and he did not bow, and he did not thank me. He took my ink-stained right hand in his scarred one, in front of all of them, and he said, "Lo, only for me. I have been a fool in a great many rooms, Margaret. I should like to spend the rest of my life being wise in this one. Will you have me? Not the underwriting. Me." "You believed I did not sign the deed," I said. "You stayed away because I told you to. You came because I told you to. Do you know how rare it is, Your Grace, to be believed and obeyed in the same week?" "Nathaniel," he said. The first name landed like the bell above us. "Nathaniel," I said. And I had never in my life said a man's Christian name and meant it. And the saying of it undid the last careful thing in me. "Yes, I will have you." And there on the floor of Lloyd's, beneath the bell that tolls for lost ships, with 200 underwriters pretending very hard to study their papers, the Duke of Calverton kissed me, and I let the pen fall. Because for once in my life, I did not need to be holding it. The Hesperus came home 11 days later, with all £80,000 in her holds, and every family in Henry's manifest was paid to the last shilling. And I watched the Duke read the list of their names, with his brother 3 years dead, and finally, at last, at rest. We were married in the autumn, quietly, in the city church my grandfather had helped to build, and I did not take his name in trade. Holt's is still Holt's. I sign its policies with my father's pen, and the Duke of Calverton has learned to bring me my coffee in the counting room, and to sit in the second best chair, because the seat at the head of the table, as I told him on the first morning, is taken. Lasseter we did not see again. The Argus folded within the month, a scandal sheet that prints a forgery, the whole city has watched disproved, is a scandal sheet no one will pay to read, and its proprietor sailed for the continent ahead of his creditors. And the last anyone heard, he was selling other men's secrets in Brussels for a great deal less than £25,000. A year later, on a wet October morning very like the one when he first walked into my counting house and reached for my chair, I came down to find Nathaniel already at the table. The ledgers open, my father's pen lying uncapped on the green baize where I always leave it. He had not touched the head of the table. He never does. "There is a venture," he said, looking up, "that I think your father would have liked. I have been waiting to show you. Sit down, Your Grace." He smiled, the way that reaches the whole of his face, the way I never once saw it reach at a ball. "You have rather more time than you think." I sat down at the head of my table, in the life I had signed for in my own 2 hands, and I picked up the pen. 2 lines, where the world sees one.